Welcome, everyone. My name is Brandon Hall. I'm the programs director at the Harpswell Heritage Land Trust. And we have been putting on a fantastic set of vernal pool programs throughout the spring. And we want to say a big old thank you to the Casco Bay Estuary Partnership for funding these programs with the grants. And we have had a fun time with all of our littles and big kids all over Harpswell this spring by doing vernal pool walks. We've had vernal pool story time at the local library and over at the school. Today we have a program more focused towards municipal workers and landowners here in Harpswell. So we've hit a big, diverse breadth of topics all around vernal pools. So I've been very excited and privileged to learn with you all along the way. Throughout today's program, we ask you to follow those basic rules of the road for Zoom calls. I know most of us are very familiar these days, but as reminders, try to keep your microphones on mute throughout today's talk. And we will invite you to ask questions after the initial presentation today. And we also want to acknowledge our local lands here in Harpswell, or what's now called Harpswell today, and the stewards that preceded many of us today. The Wabanaki peoples from this area, specifically the Eastern Abenaki, and we want to keep them in mind as well today. And so as we go forth, our speaker, without further ado, is Dr. Aram Calhoun. She's the professor of emerita of wetlands and ecology and conservation for the University of Maine system. And without further ado, I will let her run with today's program. I'll take myself off spotlight and I will be monitoring the chats. Feel free to put your questions in there throughout the program. However, she will probably address many of those, so we will hold off to a little bit later in the talk, and we will be mindful of your time, and we'll have a hard stop today at 1 o'clock if we get to that point. Without further ado, Dr. Calhoun, feel free to take over, and I'll be here if you shall need me.
Great. Thank you so much, Brandon. And everyone, thank you for joining me for your lunch hour. Um, Brandon asked me to talk about vernal pools, and I love to talk about vernal pool ecology, but since I had the ear of a land trust and landowners and some municipal officials, I would rather touch on vernal pool ecology, share a little background research, and move forward to talk about how do we, as people who care about the environment, move forward with local vernal pool conservation in a post-regulation world. So I'll go from there, and hopefully we have some lively discussion at the end. So Brandon, I can't seem to click ahead. Is there a reason that would be? There. Okay, got it. Super. So in case you're not familiar with vernal pools, some key characteristics of them is that they're ephemeral to semi-permanent. And what for this means for a lot of you is that pools either dry out completely during the summer or they dry down to such a level that there's no oxygen in the little pool of water in the middle. They're generally really small. They have no permanent inlet or outlet. And the real key is no breeding fish, green frogs, or bullfrogs. And that's because it's an incredibly unique breeding wetland habitat. Those things listed above, fish and those permanent water frogs, are predators on the animals who make their breeding habitat vernal pools. So it is really critical that these pools are full of water in the spring when they're laying eggs and that they dry down by the end of the season so that there can't be permanent fish, green frogs, or bullfrogs because of the predation. So key features, you probably know this already, and some of you have already been out in the field, are fairy shrimp, which is a very charismatic crustacean up to about an inch in size. Wood frogs, which these young frogs are moving to the pools before the snow is even off the ground. Spotted salamanders, and something we call the blue spotted complex. It's a very diverse group. It's too strange to go into right now. There's a pure diploid, just like us, where you get genetic material from each parent, but there is a group that incorporates genes from species that don't even occur in Maine. So they're called hybrids, and the really neat thing is that they're all females. So there's a whole lot to learn about them, but we're not doing that today. We're going to talk about vernal pools, and you may be amazed to know, I know some of you know what big night is. It's when people go out to look at that migration, but I had a very creative graduate student who wondered, how big a migration is it? Well, he discovered that in terms of numbers, it's the same as the wildebeest migration. And when you look at the relative size and distance that these animals go, we have a wildebeest migration here in Maine. Same number of animals, and the distance that they're traveling is equivalent to what a wildebeest travels because of their small size. So the structure of this talk is I'm going to give you a snapshot of what a vernal pool is, give you a little background on the science that informed some of the management strategies I'm going to share with you. Um, we have evolving policy in this country at both the federal, state, and local level. I'm going to be arguing for an innovative landscape approach to pool conservation, which is very tailored to local government, and discuss a way forward. So, most recently, the Clean Water Act has been weakened vis-a-vis wetlands from a Supreme Court Sackett versus EPA, which we don't need to get into. All we need to say is that the federal government is currently only protecting wetlands that are lakes or streams or connected to the lakes and streams. So that leaves out vernal pools, forested wetlands, and the list goes on and on and on, prairie potholes. So, in this environment where we really don't have the protections we used to at the federal level for vernal pools, that's what it used to be, a 750-foot um, area of discussion for conservation. Now it's only navigable water. So we're left with what the state of Maine has, which is they protect significant vernal pools based on numbers of egg masses by the indicator species. But the problem is those themselves are only less than 20% of all vernal pools in Maine. But at least we recently strengthened that 250-foot zone of consultation. You need to get a permit within 250 feet to having 100-foot no disturb zone. So we do still have a state regulation, but I'm going to show you how it isn't really successful in terms of true pool conservation and conservation of all pool values. So the amphibians don't stay in a 250-foot zone. Their life histories bring them out many distances from the pools themselves. This is only what we've documented for adults. So we're not perfect. We ran out of money for radio telemetry, etc. But wood frogs have gone over 3,000 feet from their breeding pool. Blue spotted hybrid complex 500 to 1,500 feet, and spotted sows 800 feet. And this is just the adults. The juvenile go much farther. Okay, so what we've researched over the years is the who's going and coming from vernal pools and how far are they going. We know that the salamanders are tied, the spotted, to the upland forest. We know that blue spotted and wood frogs are tied to forested wetlands, which have just been deregulated. And we know that juveniles go a lot farther from breeding pool to other breeding pools and to other hibernation habitats. So these animals have different hibernation habitats, different breeding habitats, and different summer habitats. So they have a very complex life history using both the upland forests, wetland forests, and the pools themselves. So our question as a lab was, well, where are these animals going after the pools dry down? Where's the wood frog taking off to? Where are the spotteds? The spotteds. We worked with blue spotteds. Where are they going? And how can we conserve them if if we don't know what habitats they use beyond the pool? So we put little waistbands on them with radio transmitters and tracked them in the landscape to help answer those questions. And this is a wood frog, of course. We followed them in suburban environments and in wild environments. And we won't go into all the research today. I just want to point out that each different color is a different frog that was tracked by a student, and each dot is when the student actually located the frog. And those dots, it looks like they're flying over the houses. They're not. That's just because we connected the lines that way. They went around the houses, but that's where they were located. And we did learn quite a bit from this. We learned that if you're a suburban neighborhood, we lost a lot of frogs to mowing, to cats, and to lawn chemicals. They used hedgerows and gardens to make their way into the preferred forested wetland habitat. Okay, so as a homeowner, you can do things to make little habitat runways to the forest to help them along. They need shade and cover. So that's one thing. Then we went out into the wilds of Western Maine and asked the question, well, where are wood frogs going here? Well, there is very montane and there aren't many vernal pools, so they were using primarily old beaver flowages, which is just really interesting in and of itself. It's a very important secondary habitat. The thing that really surprised us is that each dot you see there is a location of a frog. And I didn't know frogs climbed mountains, but wood frogs will travel up mountains and over eskers to summer. And we always thought they just, because we've only studied them in central and southern Maine, we always thought they went to forested wetlands. But apparently, geographic context is really important for these animals. So they're very diverse. And what my student found is that wood frogs were either summering around the giant boulders where it holds rainwater, or whoever would have thunk this, climbing these boulders and living in the mosses in the summertime. So the question we were trying to answer is if people were doing ski resorts or wind power, what do we need to conserve for amphibians that were breeding in beaver flowages or so-called vernal pools? So we're just trying to get a handle on what are the upland habitats that are important. Well, a lot of people may not care about salamanders, one frog, and a crustacean. So what other uses do vernal pools have? A lot of people, to my horror, think that amphibians are slimy and disgusting. I just always assumed everybody loved them, but then I found out that's not true. So the other things that they do is they support some threatened and endangered species in Maine, including Blanding's turtles and this spotted turtle and ribbon snakes and wood turtles. My colleague and husband, Mac Hunter, did a lot of research on Blanding and spotted. They were not studying vernal pools, but they found that the only landscapes in southern Maine that had spotted and Blanding populations had a density of vernal pools because these animals were summering in them and feeding in them. And it's a connection that we didn't even know. So they're apparently important habitats of other animals that don't breed in them. The same with the ringed bog hunter, which is a dragonfly, really prefers sphagnous vernal pools. Okay. And a real crowd pleaser, not just for the rare or the listed species. Vernal pools provide important food for all of these things. And I've put in yellow the ones that a lot of people really care about because a lot of people like to hunt. Bear, moose, turkey, ducks, deer, all these things use vernal pools. There is a tremendous amount of biomass going into the pools in the spring to breed. This is the take from one pitfall bucket. We dig a hole, we put silt fence, we drop a bucket so that we can count everybody going into the pool. We lift up the bucket, put the animals in the pool, and then we look at how many people come out. They're not people. I know that fundamentally. This is one bucket in one night full of incredible biomass, spotted, blue spotted, wood frogs, all in here. And they provide a tremendous food source. After they leave all this protein in the pool. I mean, the vernal pools are the first places to thaw in the spring, the first really hot food sources for a lot of very hungry, hibernating, and waking up mammals and birds. So we had one student put camera traps on vernal pools, and you can see it. The winter, the pool is just melting now. I don't know if you can tell what this is by its shape. Does anybody know what this is? Just scream it out if you do. Somebody, you're not unmuted. Beth, are you saying something? No, okay. It's a fisher. And it is waiting. And this is a barred owl in my very own pool, and I have seen them. I bet you didn't know this, taking out spotted salamanders. First thing in the spring. It's a tremendous food source. Now, there's ducks and all kinds of other birds. I'm just giving you a sampling of usage. And if you don't want to eat in, there is takeout. So my students have transmitters on these, and we have run into tons of beeping snakes. So these animals, they just all go out into the forest for takeout. Raptors, hawks, owls, all of these things have had are expensive transmitters in them. So we know that they are depended on for a food source. We know that things like mink, skunk, all of these animals are keyed into the vernal pool cycle, and they actually congregate around pools in the spring to get their food. It's not new. Everybody has evolved together. So now this is great because I'm going to give you 25 years of knowledge in just one slide. So migration distances, and people want to know this, like how far do I have to protect around my pool to do meaningful conservation? So I can tell you it's farther than you think. People keep putting 100-foot circles and 250-foot circles. Well, the animals aren't thinking in circles. You can see that if you think of those maps that I showed you. Do they breed and hibernate in same pools and uplands? So and they definitely breed in the same pools. There's like not, it's called site natal fidelity. Where they hatch, obviously the pool is successful, so they tend to go back to that same pool because it means it's a pool that holds water long enough to produce these amphibians. The ones that don't go back are the juveniles, who are the teenagers, the pioneers, and they travel far away from their natal pool, and that helps keep the gene pool all mixed up and healthy. But it tells us that to have a genetically healthy population, we need animals to get from one vernal pool to another one far away. And that doesn't work if you have a lot of fragmentation. Okay. The probably about hibernation is it's very expensive to keep transmitters on frogs through winter. So we have a sample size of two, but it was very compelling. We had two wood frogs that went into the uplands and 2 years in a row hibernated 10 feet from their original hibernation. So we think they go back to the same place because they pick out an area in the landscape that is got enough snow to cover them in the winter so they don't freeze, but that melts fast enough so that they can get to the breeding pools. And we know that so we looked at the soils around where they hibernated in comparison to soils in other places around them, and they picked the soils that remained more moist and that thawed first and let them go. Now, how they know that, I don't know. They have little sensors all over their little tiny bodies and make these choices. So it tells us that just like they go back to the same pools, they're really tied to their upland environment too. Okay, it isn't just the pools, it's way beyond the pools. So where they go varies dramatically with context, how old they are, and the species. I showed you wood frogs that are mountain wood frogs and ones that are lowland wood frogs. It depends on how old they are. Blue spots do different things in wood frogs, so you can't meet everybody's needs. We do know that suburban and urban population stressors are not a marriage made in heaven. The more stressed the frog or the salamander, the more susceptible they are to diseases. So we do know that they show elevated cortisol levels with stress. So this tells us we need a landscape approach. We've learned that they have complex life histories, and we've learned the importance of pools to non-breeding taxa. So some of the threats that require a landscape approach is habitat fragmentation, not just frogs getting to where they need to be, but other wildlife, and some of them those associated with older forests getting to the pools to have that spring and fall feed. Changing climate. We need an array of pools with different hydro periods or amount of time that they hold water in a landscape because some pools are going to completely dry out, and even some beaver flowages or permanent ponds may become ephemeral wetlands. So we have a shifting mosaic of what is going to be a vernal pool in the future. And there's the synergy or the effects of the two together of changing climate and fragmentation equals big stress for amphibians and reptiles. So it requires us to think beyond little circles around pools. We have the stresses of houses, and now this is going to be even more because we don't regulate pools being built right next to the pool. There's runoff from pollution. There's cats and dogs and all those sorts of things. And eventually, my fear is that we've got all these pools in the landscape, and eventually it'll be so fragmented that there is not going to be connectivity between houses. Now, obviously, we can't stop people from having somewhere to live. So we came up with an innovative strategy for letting people live where there are amphibians. And that's what I want to talk to you about today. The one last stressor here is, does anyone see those are headlights in the to the north of the photo? We have Greg LeClaire in the state does a big study on roadkill on Big Night, and he's keeping track of this, but it is significant. And when towns see hot spots, they often will close the roads or get people to help move animals across. But that's yet another stressor of living with human beings. The climate change issue that I'm very worried about and have seen over the years, people always talk about, well, the wood frog population isn't doing well because the pool dried. Well, even more important is winter conditions. Wood frogs freeze most of their body and they live right below the soil surface. I mean, you ski over them, you walk over them all winter. If they don't get the snowpack that we are used to, and they get the ice pack that we've been having, they suffocate, they thaw early, and they don't have the resources to rethaw. So when I don't see animals in vernal pools, I always ask myself, well, what was the winter like? So I'm very concerned about these false thaws that we're having. We have more and more these guys, the salamanders are in burrows, mostly shrew burrows. They don't freeze and they're down below the ground. So as soon as we get these melting in the thaw, the water goes into their burrows and they think it's time to go. So they come out and then they freeze solid as soon as we go back to winter. So I'm very worried about that. And that's another stressor. So the more stresses that we can alleviate, the better. With drying pools, we're getting egg masses being stranded and we're getting dry down before the animals have had a chance to leave. Now, this sounds doom and gloom. It isn't. It's a plea to think about a different solution. It's a plea to think about what else could we do to ensure vital populations of vernal pools and vernal pool species. Well, there's alternative habitats. I am so excited. A little diversion, but my husband and I conserve land along the Union River. That's where we are. And we told IF&W to drop nuisance beavers on our land because we love beaver. Two nuisance beavers were dropped off 2 weeks ago. They built this 200-foot dam, and just after 2 weeks, I had frogs. I had a hooded merganser family with chicks and all kinds of birds and dragonflies. It's just amazing what beaver can do. So we need to start thinking about beaver as partners in mitigating climate change effects on reptiles and amphibians and everything. So really trying to support beaver. Forested wetlands, which are no longer regulated at the federal level, are very important habitats that may end up being important vernal pool habitats. So this is the happy part. What can we do moving forward? We know they've got complex areas to be in. There's summer habitat and there's winter habitat, and it's just like, and every animal has a different need. So what can we do? Well, I worked with a team to develop the Maine Vernal Pool Special Area Management Plan. It's a federal tool designed for specific resources that are special. And getting to the end point, we got it adopted by the Army Corps and the Maine DEP, and it's available for adoption by any Maine municipality or any municipality in New England. So I'm going to tell you a little bit about this, and you can see if your town would be interested. So it was a grueling process because it was a completely what is the word? We all had to agree. It was a consent group. And we had over 100 meetings over 7 years. 25 people came regularly to these meetings, and 50 pounds of chocolate were consumed. So, what we came up with is this. The result was in 2016 a Vernal Pool Special Area Management Plan. And we had three federal and five state agencies working with us. The towns of Orono and Topsom have adopted this. The ones in orange are folks that ecologists don't usually work with. We had economists, developers, and planning consultants joining us. And that's why it took 7 years, because it took 2 years for people to start trusting us. But the result was a consent document that everyone bought into. And it is more robust because of that. It's not like we listened to everybody, and so it took us more time to solve the problem. Here's how it works. If you are in a growth area and all these blue dots, this is Orono, all those blue dots are pools. If you're in a growth area and you're a developer, at the time we developed it, you had to get a federal vernal pool permit and a state vernal pool permit. Both were different. And I can understand why people hate wetlands because the regulations are ridiculous and it depends on who you get out there. It was completely unpredictable. So, with this special area management plan, here's the way it works. If you're a developer, you can go into a growth area and assume that it's a significant vernal pool, assume it's a regulated vernal pool, and you pay a fee based on the value of your property with and without vernal pools. So it's worth more without them. Okay, and you subtract what it's worth with them, with you having to go get permits, and you pay the town a fee based on that formula. And you don't have to get a federal permit, you don't have to get a state permit, and you don't have to wait until the spring till they can do surveys. So you can develop anytime. That money is held in the town and then it is given to a land trust. And the land trust can use the money to secure conservation easements from landowners in the rural area. So the way this works, here's Orono. They have a designated development area where the SAMP works, and then they have the rural area. And here's a pool that wants to be developed. And instead of putting all kinds of regulations and a circle around this pool that is not going to conserve vernal pool values, we assume that it is gone and we use the fee to conserve two vernal pools and some amount of forest around them in the rural area. And it helps maintain the rural character of Maine towns, which is important to a lot of Maine municipalities. It gives money to the landowners who don't feel like it's a taking, so they get some benefit to conserving their pools. And it makes the towns vital because human beings can now develop land that was not allowed to be developed because of vernal pool regulations. And it wasn't really conserving vernal pools, it was just conserving urban wetlands, which are important too. And the development community told me they don't really want to fill the pool, they want to build right up to it. It still serves as an urban wetland. It will have more weedy species like bullfrogs and green frogs. It won't function as a vernal pool anymore, but it's still a valuable wetland. So that's this is what it looks like. So the developer pays a fee, it goes to the town. The town then sends it to the land trust, and the land trust to the rural landowner. Now, the good thing about this special area management plan, if you're a land trust, you'd be worried, well, what do I do if I can't spend the money? Well, if you can't spend the money, you have 3 years to find a landowner. If you can't spend the money, then It's not a problem. The town is liable for nothing. The money then goes to the state in lieu fee program, which is the mitigation program for the state of Maine. So there is no liability for the town. It's just the land trust who worked with us said that they like it because they can use it as seed money for buying green space that they were already looking after, and they know the landowners more than any of us do, the land trust interacting with landowners. So that's the way that it works. Um, I have a website, and this is a shot from the website because I did go through this quickly because it would be boring to you to go through it step by step. There is a PowerPoint on the website that explains the vernal pool special management area. And there is the actual manual is on there. And it has been revised based on feedback from towns. We lowered the amount of land that is needed in the rural area because southern Maine towns said we don't even have the acreage that you're looking for. So we were responsive to that. And it's much more flexible about how much land and how many pools are conserved in the rural area to make it work. We have a lot of voluntary guidelines for landowners. If you're not a town and you're just a landowner and you have a vernal pool, you don't want to put a conservation easement on it, there are best development practices. If you have a woodlot, forestry habitat management guidelines will show you how to manage your vernal pool and the best way to harvest forest and keep your pool in good shape. So those are resources that you can look at if you're a landowner. But no, if you do put a conservation easement into the program, you are allowed to take firewood using the formula in the forestry habitat management guidelines. You can work with your community forester to get wood from your vernal pool area, just following these guidelines. So there's a lot of flexibility in these conservation easements. We have just developed um, different pamphlets that are on the website now, and they explain the SAMP from the landowner perspective. Why is it beneficial for the land trust? We've got one for the developers, and we've got one for the towns. So those are all things that you can look at depending which hat you wear, which explain why you might want to use this and how you would go about it. I can tell you that the towns who have already adopted the strategy are willing to help other towns or answer questions. Um, we have not had a successful project yet because we had it with let's see, no judgment. I'm just telling you the order of things. We had COVID and then we had Trump. And so a lot of the progress that we had made with the conservation plans was put aside for a while. And we are back into working with towns and trying to get a project going. I have most recently talked with both the Army Corps and the DEP, and they are just waiting for a SAMP project. They're very supportive of it as a better mitigation method, and it's all voluntary for the landowners, land trusts, and towns. So that's where you go to the web page. We also have, you know how the main what is it? The Maine Farmland Trust, you can have a sign out that say you're part of that. You can also have something that says that you care about vernal pools on your land. Um, and if you haven't seen this, there's the third edition of Maine Amphibians and Reptiles is now out, and it has 10,000 new occurrences and much more literature cited. It's 25 years of humane research is in this book. So there's life history accounts. All of the new work on the vernal pool amphibians is included in this book based on the science of so many graduate students who have worked on these creatures. It was really fun to pull all of that data after since the last time this has been published together. And because publishing is getting cheaper with color photos, if you have the first or second edition, all the photos had to be in the middle, but now they're distributed with each account and we could put a lot of photos in. They're really gorgeous and you'll learn a lot that you didn't know about the life history of these animals. So that's a plug for that book. Um, and here is the website. Uh, and you will find on the website everything about the SAMP program. There are some PowerPoints that are in the old-fashioned PowerPoint way that a graduate student is turning into storyboards because I'm not modern anymore and I don't care to be. So we're doing that. And we are updating it and turning it's been a research website, but since I'm retired now, we're turning it into more of a vernal pool website for towns and for information and linked to a bunch of other vernal pool websites. One last thing, since we have another minute here before questions, is I was a little negative in the beginning, looking like, oh no, what do we do? But I'm engaged in a Midwestern, Northeastern vernal pool consortium of many folks like you who want to collaborate across states to come up with municipal and local vernal pool conservation tools. And we're sharing ways of doing remote sensing of pools, we're sharing outreach techniques, we're sharing science. And this group wants to form a strong regional lobby that can advocate for vernal pools and maybe be listened to more because we are many states strong. So there's a lot of good things happening with states and with like-minded people at a regional scale for vernal pools right now, and that makes me happy and keeps me really busy. And I think, Brandon, that we can open up for questions at this point.
All right. Well, thank you so much. That was all amazing. So, a couple of things as a reminder, and folks, you're more than welcome to stay off camera. Just utilize that chat. If you have any questions for us, throw them in there and we'll get to those. If folks are on camera, or even if you're off camera and want to ask your question verbally, feel free to hit that raise hand button in the bottom of your window, your Zoom window, and we'll call on you. And if you need help to unmute yourself, you should, the bottom left-hand corner, you should see an audio with a microphone icon. Just click on that when we call on you to unmute yourself. And if you're having trouble with your audio, you can maybe even click on that little up arrow button if you have headphones and different microphones attached to select the correct one. We'll start off with Bruce, threw his hand up first. I'm going to invite Bruce on and throw your question out there for everyone. And make sure you unmute yourself, Bruce.
Uh, we are well, I'm at Thornton Oaks, as are some of the other people listening here. We are observing and studying our involvement in a nearby development that had been surveyed, and they identified no significant vernal pools. Now, and even though when we go walking there, we can see evidence of vernal pools and small ones that may or may not be significant. If you could just, somebody could just discuss that issue of significance.
Sure. Okay, that's a great question. Thank you, Bruce. So significant vernal pools, um, I have bug bites and ticks everywhere. I'm sorry, I'm scratching like an ape, but I have dried blood. Significant vernal pools. I helped define the definition of those along with Philippe de Maynadier and another group of people. It was a political definition because we were told at the time that we needed less than half of all the pools that were surveyed to be significant vernal pools. Well, it turned out to be only 20%. But the definition is based on number of egg masses per species. Okay, so for wood frogs, it's 20. For spotted salamanders, it's 40 egg masses. And for blue spotted and fairy shrimp, it's presence. Okay, so but the problem with it not being a scientific definition is it depends on where you are, um, what a significant pool number is, because, in northern Maine, pools are less distributed and they tend to have much higher numbers. The other problem is that some pools are in clusters, and one population will deposit its eggs in a cluster of pools. So, by virtue of that, there are less eggs per pool because it's one population using multiple pools. Okay, so it would behoove you if you were able to count, see how far apart the pools are and count egg masses and then tally them up. But that's the definition of significant vernal pools. It's an arbitrary, well, somewhat arbitrary choice. And the reason that we're trying to get the SAMP, the Special Area Management Plan, on board is that any community is going to have trouble fighting this. Um, and that's why it's good to have a proactive tool in your quiver. I don't know, Bruce, did that answer your question? Oh, you need to unmute yourself.
When is this survey done?
Surveys, well, that's the other problem. Wood frogs tend to lay all their eggs in, just a few nights. The salamanders can carry on egg depositing for 6 weeks. Now, most people go out once and count egg masses. The legislation that we have in Maine doesn't let you count egg masses in the same pool if it's on someone else's property. So, yeah, that's why we're looking for proactive, because it's very difficult to convince people that you have a significant vernal pool, especially if it crosses property lines. And if, there isn't time to survey through a 6 week period. Sometimes people go too soon and maybe they take advantage of that. Fairy shrimp, you might not see they're the first ones there, but my students and I have seen fairy shrimp. I call it a bloom, even though it isn't really, but we've seen them come out in the middle of the summer, a different species perhaps. So proactive is best. Conservation lands that have pools on them and don't put trails right by them and are, that's the answer to your questions. It's very hard to fight these things.
Thank you.
All right. Do we have any other questions out there? Just looking back in the chat, we want to shout out to, we have some new landowners moving to Harpswell, so welcome. And then we have some folks from the town office as well. And feel free, everyone, if you haven't seen it yet, throw your questions in the chat. If you want to opt out of the audio option, and that's okay as well. I see your hand. Go ahead. I don't see a name on there, but you are unmuted. So go ahead with your question.
Brandon, it's Josie. I think I'm identified as iPhone 5. Anyways, this was just a great presentation. Thank you so much. In Harpswell, we're 3 peninsulas, and so we don't really have the growth zone and rural area that you were describing in Orono. But I have a sense, I don't know for sure, but that we have probably lots of what I would call pocket vernal pools that are probably just on people's lands that they may or may not know about. We probably have a couple larger ones that are on some of the acreage that's undeveloped. How might the SAMP work in like a coastal, fairly developed situation? I was intrigued by your discussion with the suburban, like the hedgerows and how leading paths could help. So, any thoughts on how this might be applied to?
Yes, well, the best development practices and the habitat management guidelines, PDFs of those publications are on the web page, is good for the individual landowner and people talking to their neighbors. Um, that's all I can think of at that level.
Mhm.
Cats, pesticides around the pools, those are all problems. Right? Lawn mowing close to the pools, or pick your times to mow. There's a big migration to the pools in the spring, and there's a huge migration of baby animals coming out in August and September. So,
Ah.
so if you see a bunch of little froglets or salamanders moving, put off mowing. There's a big flush of them in August and September. Um, I don't know, be pro beaver flowages because they may be our saving grace in the end. There are ways to handle nuisance beaver with beaver deceivers. There's Skip Lyle out of Vermont. has figured out how to work with beavers, so the town should be aware of that before you just ship out all your beavers and trap them.
And did you really just call up IF&W and they gave you 2 beavers?
We did. We said, please, we've got land. We love beaver. We have a lot of extinct beaver flowages for some reason or another, trapped out, whatever. These guys took them 2 weeks to figure out where there had been a flowage, like all the dead trees were there. They filled it up, and it is unbelievable. Just makes me so happy to think about it. So I really did just call IF&W. Yep.
That's
So it,
wonderful.
yeah. So I mean, just short of applying the SAMP, just be mindful landowners and talk to your neighbors. And in the land trust, I don't know if Harpswell owns vernal pool properties, but educating people about them and protecting, being an exemplary steward of your vernal pools will help.
Yeah, I'll just jump in and piggyback on that. A lot of people here may be familiar with the vernal pool on our out on our Mine and Hackett trails, specifically the Hackett side. And I use the tools, and by the way, it's linked in the chats if you didn't catch Dr. Calhoun's slide. And all those resources are available there. And I took some of those tools and I kind of mapped out earlier this spring from one of our major vernal pools on our properties. And it truly will take a collective effort, because even as a land trust, and we have a bigger parcel of land, it still overlaps the neighboring parcels. So, and the adjacent landowners of recommended protection. So it really will, especially here in Harpswell, where a lot of smaller parcels, really you have to talk to your neighbors if you want to have a collective effort.
Yeah, and be sure not just to talk about amphibians, because a lot of people don't care about them. It's really a wildlife magnet, for mammals, birds, migrating birds. It has a lot of value beyond whether or not you care about reptiles and amphibians, and that's key to remember. It really links wildlife in our landscapes.
We do have a question in the chat. Are land trusts obligated to use funds described as you did to try to find rural pools before they can apply the funds elsewhere? And what if they have a project that they consider needs the money more?
So you have to use the money for a vernal pool conservation easement, of course. We in Orono and Topsom, we mapped out the pools ahead of time. We have 13 towns that we did surveys on. But we're hoping that with this program, that landowners who were secretive about their pools might come forward and say, hey, I have a really nice vernal pool and some forest around it. I'd be interested in perhaps getting money for a conservation easement. So I think that answers it. If you cannot use the money for something other than vernal pool conservation. You can use it if there's a greenway that you're working on across private properties and it's part of that project. Absolutely.
And I think it's a great thing you did bring up, Dr. Calhoun, with looking for those partners, especially in the hunting world. As you said, some of the biggest protectors with some conservation duck hunters love wetlands.
Oh, yes, of course they do.
So,
Yes,
yeah.
absolutely. And we have so many instances of ducks coming back and landing first in the pools to get a good feed and then moving on. Absolutely. That's what I'm saying. It's really a magnet for hungry wildlife, both in the early spring and in the fall.
All right. So make sure if you have been sitting on the sidelines and you have a question you want answered, feel free to hit that raise your hand icon at the bottom, or physically raise your hand if you want to go old school, and we'll invite you on as well. Josie, did you have another question?
No, sorry.
I'll mute you. There you go. All right. Any other questions? Make sure you add them in your chat, and we'll make sure we wrap up to be respectful to everyone's time. We have Margaret. I'll unmute you and go forward with your question.
Hi, I'm catcher in the office of the town planner with Margaret as a Bowdoin-based intern this summer. I was just curious, you mentioned sort of the impact of climate change with respect to those temporary winter thaws. And that was kind of one of the issues that stood out to me as like I don't know what you do about that, but I'm curious if there's any text in the plan that you mentioned that sort of addresses climate impacts like those. Um, thank you.
That's a great question. There is nothing we can do about climate change except perhaps reinstitute the Clean Air Act. But that said, it just is an indicator that they already have uncontrollable stressors. So whatever the limits we can make to really productive pools or pools in rural landscapes, animals want to live and they will evolve slowly, but we got to give them a chance. So it's just a plea that no, we can't change some of these stressors, but we can help eliminate stressors that we're causing in particular areas. And I realize people have to live somewhere. That's why we did the SAMP in a development zone and a rural zone and making sure we've, got plenty of conservation lands where that things can play out. So unfortunately, I wish I could change the thawing winters.
Thank you.
You're muted.
I guess, oops, I guess I was muted. So let us know before we run out of time here. If you do have a lingering question, we'd love to answer it. And Adrian, I'll bring you on. And
Yeah, hi, thanks. Interesting presentation. I love how much passion you bring to it. Had a silly question first, but then I'll ask this. You mentioned charismatic shrimp. I wondered what made shrimp charismatic.
Um,
The real question, though, was, are vernal pools, by definition, naturally occurring? Or can they be created, say, in a development, doing their stormwater management, sediment ponds, and that sort of thing?
those are two great questions. The charismatic one first. If you're an animal who turns the color of what you eat, which is generally pink, and swim upside down, I think you're charismatic. And they're fairy shrimp because they they deposit their eggs as the pool is drying, and the eggs have to freeze and desiccate. And then when the waters fill up, they hatch the next spring. The fairy shrimp aren't there. The eggs are left there. So they're really magical. They're like little forest fairies, and they are the freshwater analog of sea monkeys. I don't know if you knew that. And they're great food, which is why they need to get through their 6-week life cycle before all the creatures come to eat them. Okay, and then could you remind me what the second question was? Just 2 words, and I'll remember.
Naturally occurring
Yeah,
vernal
yeah.
pools.
Okay, the formal definition for regulation for significant vernal pools is naturally occurring or naturalized. And naturalized means maybe 20 years ago it was a farm pond, but it's now all forest and IF&W has to make a determination on that. But it's mostly naturally occurring because when we created the regulation, we didn't want people upset about regulating every created ditch or, borrow pile, something like that. Okay. So they are generally naturally occurring. Created vernal pools is a whole nother issue. Actually, on the web page, I actually did a review of created vernal pools, when and when not to use them. So that's not an easy answer, but in places where vernal pools are very rare, created pools can work and should be done. In places where there are natural pools and we're saying, well, we want to fill that, we're just going to create one. Hydrology often fails. The animals have natal fidelity. There's just so many problems with created pools and natural landscapes. A lot of the animals will get to a created pool first and think that they've gotten stronger and their trip has been shorter to get to their breeding pool, when in fact their good breeding pool is close by, but they then lay their eggs in the created pool. So ditches are a big problem going into detention ditches and things. It waylays the population and puts them in areas with more pollutants, more salt, etc. And the other thing, it detention ditches and created pools often harbor bullfrogs and green frogs. Bullfrogs carry chytrid, the fungus, and ranavirus, and they don't get it themselves, but they transmit it to wood frogs. So a bigger population of those sort of more weedy species next to the pools can cause health issues.
Thank you. That's very interesting.
And great questions.
Right. I had a quick question from a colleague here. And are there any efforts around town-wide or municipal-wide mapping of vernal pools? I know in Harpswell, we've done that in the past, but
Yeah.
have you seen it to kind of get a gauge of where these vernal pools are located, how many there are, et cetera?
That's a great question. There is the university was looking at a big program to do that, and I don't think it was successful. But I know when I was working with my 13 towns, some did work together because it's cheaper to get a flight that has contiguous towns. And I wish more people would work on that. I do know that the technology is getting better, and that's something our regional group is working on, making it known what the best technology is and sharing that. And we have representatives from every state in that group. So that is something that we're working on because you can't conserve a resource if you don't know where it is. Great question.
All right, folks. Well, we're going to be respectful for everyone's time today and our speaker. I did add that link to A Pools and People again in your chats. I will follow up in an email. I know some folks weren't able to catch the beginning of today's talk. We did record it, so I'll send that out to everyone. And thank you again for all of your time today. Definitely check out those resources. I jotted a lot down here myself. And I've been on that website. There's a wealth of information on there, so you can spend hours, I promise you. And so definitely check it out. Again, thank you, Dr. Calhoun, for your time. And thank you, everyone, for joining today. And have a wonderful, beautiful day outside in Harpswell and beyond. Bye now.
Thank you, Brandon, for organizing this and everyone for coming. It was fun.